Good morning, everybody. I'm going to wait a little bit for people to start rolling in. Really excited for today's webinar about tech transfer success stories. So we got some people starting to come in. We are rolling in. Okay, so welcome to the 2024 Hyperspace Challenge webinar series. It's really great to have you all here. I'm joined by Gary White, founder of Opportunity, and Andrew Clark, founder of Unify, Campbell, founder of Solid Power and Rocore, that is now Redwire, and John Howard, CTO of Canopy Aerospace. It's really great to have everybody here. We are coming at you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was supposed to be in Q Station today, but I couldn't make it. So we're from my home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's very, very beautiful here today, as always. I would like for you guys to be involved in this conversation. So please add questions to the Q&A as they come. It's down there at the bottom of your screen. If you put them in the chat, I'm going to ask you to put them back in the Q&A just because it's easier and make sure that everybody sees what they need to see. So please put your questions there. We want to hear from you guys. Also, please tell us who you are, where you're from. Want to know your name and your company or your university. Really glad to have a lot of universities registered for this event. It's good to see y'all here. We are doing this event specifically for the Space Force CTIO office. They are looking to engage with universities and want them to do some tech transfer. They would love to see that research that's going on the bench moved into commercialization. So brought you some success stories here just to give you kind of an outline of what it took for these people to get that done. So say hello in the chat. Like I said, give us your questions in Q&A. I'm going to hand it over now to Gary White, who's going to be your moderator. He's going to do a great job, way better than me at leading the conversation. So thank you, Gary, for being here.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. And hello, everybody out there, and hi to all the panelists. Thanks for being here today. I'm Gary White. I lead a company called Opportunity. We advise startups and small businesses in doing business with the government, as well as achieving, some private capital to pair against that, and figuring out where their best market fit lies. So prior to this, I'm a retired GSA guy, as well as a retired Air Force officer. I led the innovation directorate at GSA and mostly their SIBR programs and other small business programs there. So enough about me. Why don't we go to the panelists? And Andrew, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Doug and close out with John for some intros.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew Clark with Untitled Technologies. We're a spinoff that left Sandia National Labs in 2022 to commercialize some supercomputing technology to make supercomputing available to everyone, anywhere. So we primarily focus on software. We're hardware agnostic. We're here local in Albuquerque and have a lot of experience working with both the labs and commercial entities. So happy to be here. Looking forward to seeing everybody's questions and answering yours as well.
Hey, all, my name's Doug Campbell. I'm an engineer by training. Have had a number of startup successes up in the Denver area. One was an aerospace component supplier into the low Earth orbit satellite industry. That firm was called Rocore, was acquired by Redwire Space in 2020. And then I also did a next generation electric vehicle battery company that I spun out of the University of Colorado Boulder. Led it for a decade, ultimately taking it public on NASDAQ in 2021. And now I am on a bunch of boards. I'm on the board at the University of New Mexico. I'm on the board of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory up in Golden. I'm an active investor, both directly as an angel and also an LP into several New Mexico-centric venture funds. So pleasure to be here.
John Howard here, CTO, co-founder of Canopy Aerospace. We're building the factories of the future to produce advanced ceramic components for aerospace and defense applications. We're based out of South Denver. We're down in Littleton, so not too far from Doug. Yeah, material scientist by training, and have done a lot of tech transfer over the course of my career. The initial IP for Canopy was licensed from NASA Ames. We found it through the FedTech Accelerator, And I've been involved with that type of ecosystem for a while and started my first company around some IP out of Naval Surface Warfare Center, Corona. So pretty familiar with the process and looking forward to fielding questions, like Andrew said. Yeah.
Well, nice to formally meet all of you, and thanks for the introductions. So, John, at the end there, you mentioned ecosystem. So I thought, it's kind of interesting. All of you guys and your companies have played in the, Midwest and Southwest region of the U.S. What's your take on the ecosystems there, and as they've been growing, particularly with government involvement, and where do you see that going, and was it valuable, and is it valuable to you today?
It's a great first one. I think part of it for us is luck. We were paired up with inventors from different federal labs. I've done mostly federal lab technology transfer, less so on the academic side, though we're doing some now. It's more for us finding centers of excellence within aerospace and defense, and there's just a lot of that out west. We're based out of Denver. There's a pretty large explosion of aerospace here. I think by capita it has the most aerospace engineers. Obviously, LA has the most. So that continues to compound. Though we do find ourselves, I was in Indiana last week where there's a lot of work in hypersonics at a NSWC Crane. So there's a large pool. I don't know. I think it's pretty broad. I don't know if I have a strong feeling beyond LA being incredibly strong. You can find pretty excellent IP and partners pretty much everywhere. Yeah.
Doug, what about was your experience there? Obviously, I mean, two successful companies, two successful exits. How did the ecosystem play in that for you, and how do you see it growing?
Oh, so again, just to be clear, this was up in Colorado. Phenomenal ecosystem, especially for aerospace. No shortage of skilled talent, and heck, a lot of your customers are there as well. You've got Lockheed and Waterton Canyon, Ball Aerospace, et cetera. So it's just a phenomenal ecosystem. So relied on it. Oh, there we go, Ball. Relied on that ecosystem quite extensively, and it's germane to my mission now, which is to try to foster a similar ecosystem down here in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Andrew, how about you? Any take on the ecosystem piece?
Well, so for us, New Mexico is where we've mostly focused on, and it's important because the two national labs that are here, AFRL, the academic environment, where we focus on supercomputing, that's a critical asset and capability for all of those. So there's not necessarily a lot of crossover between some of the work that LANL does with AFRL necessarily with New Mexico Tech, but there's a lot of opportunity and there's a huge demand for talent. And so we look at this particular ecosystem as an opportunity to build a pipeline for that talent in the state to really continue providing advantages to both those who are here as well as the major institutions that we have. But then, right, as you start to build momentum, we can look outside of that and continue to do work further across the US. So for us, as we continue to get started, that's a big focus for us.
I appreciate that. Those are all good perspectives, and I think that's a kind of a good transition into, as part of the ecosystems that, we're talking about here. Tech transfer obviously is a big piece, and that's what we're ultimately here to talk about today. But, it comes in various forms, right? I mean, there's tech transfer out of labs, whether, John, as you mentioned, within, federal lab space, or whether it's from a university, or whether it's in an acquisition, as Doug has been, a party to, where you're transitioning tech from one company to another in terms of IP transfer and the sale of that. What did the tech transfer journey look for each of you in your experience, and what tips and tricks do you have to share about your journey along that path? Doug, why don't we start with you on this one?
Okay. Yeah, it's all over the map. So in my career, I've done license agreements from the University of Colorado Boulder. I did a license agreement out of Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. And then I did a license out of the Air Force Research Lab, actually here at Kirtland Air Force Base. And the experience with each was wildly different. I would say the smoothest was far and away AFRL. That was the easiest license agreement I did. Next followed by Oak Ridge. So AFRL had a very streamlined process. It was very smooth. Oak Ridge was also for the most part, relatively smooth, relatively straightforward. University of Colorado was extremely challenging. And again, full disclosure, this was 2011. So I suspect that tech transfer office has improved quite a bit. But back then it was still somewhat early days. And it was very challenging dealing with the terms, trying to educate the tech transfer office on the relative maturity of the technology that we were endeavoring to license, having to, not being sophisticated investors, having to explain to them why certain terms that they were requesting would just make it very challenging for us as a company to move forward, because investors acquiring entities would balk at those kinds of terms. We ultimately got there, but it took a lot of hand-holding and a lot of conversations, whereas I didn't have any of those issues with Oak Ridge or AFRL.
And is that just because they had processes already laid out, templates for everything that?
I think so. I think also they're not as reliant on, let's just say, licensing revenues. They really just want to see the tech used,
Yeah.
and more from almost from an economic development standpoint. Whereas universities, let's face it, their tech transfer offices are resource constrained. I mean, I understand they take licensing revenues and they just put it right back into their operations, paying off patent fees and things like that. So it's they're just run differently.
Okay. John, did you have similar experience? And I know you spent some years at FedTech, so you saw it too from the sort of startup studio side of
Yeah, I've
things.
seen it all, and we're in talks with a university right now around some IP and kind of seeing some of the similar things Doug is saying. And then if you do SIBRs, you see similar things. Universities just have very unique ways they treat the process and the IP rights themselves. The whole nonprofit side of it makes it a little bit complicated. We have a harder time with universities around IP rights than we would typically from like a private company, which is kind of a little bit surprising, I think, when you first hear that, but then you find ways to deal with it. First tip I would say is finding a good champion on the tech transfer side. And in that case, for us, it's always been the inventor. Sometimes you are the inventor. In my case, I've never been the inventor. So you have this challenge of getting up to speed on the tech incredibly fast, both in terms of the market for it, but also in terms of how it works. And then, as Doug mentioned, like what are potential technical shortcomings of it? Like what's the actual maturity, technology readiness level of the tech? Then having that whole conversation, getting that out as soon as possible is really critical. And then building a really strong relationship. To this day, we still work with our NASA partner. We have weekly meetings with them. We've been able to establish a relationship, then move that over to NASA. It doesn't have CRADAs. They have Space Act agreements, but establish a Space Act agreement. So now we have a formal way to collaborate. Then go find a program that will pay us both to work on in some form or fashion so that we can continue to have funding to work together. And that way we have this really strong pipeline of knowledge from the subject matter experts in government who want to stay on the government side, but quickly funneling that into the private side. And that's how you have like kind of the most seamless, most seamless, it's a very bumpy road, but the most seamless transition from lab to market. Whereas I have advised a number of companies who have gotten paired up. And frankly, often my advice is if the inventor is pretty non-responsive, they just want to like parachute it into your company and then the tech that is, and then they don't want to be involved at all. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is going to be a much harder situation if you can't call them up, just casually and ask them a question about the tech. You have a hard time. And so every case I've done, I've had a really strong relationship with the inventor and leverage that to, frankly, go get additional funded programs. So it's been able to be a really strong pipeline that way.
You bring up a good point there too, in the participation or lack thereof, depending on the the use case here with the initial inventor or the lab researcher. That can be critical, and sometimes they are the person, right, that's going to be an entrepreneur, or perhaps they should be. Nobody's filled that role yet. Andrew, what have you seen, in your experience, in terms of in terms of working with a researcher, somebody that invented or helped further, a particular technology for, an IP, and then, their role, helping them, define their role, determine whether they're going to play in the, the whole transfer of the technology in the first place or not. And what tips, I go around the room at the end of your question or your answer here. What tips would you guys give to these researchers, in terms of playing in this space and how to prepare themselves best for that?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. It's a hard question. The two words I would give as advice is start early. So really echoing on what Doug has said. Um, some people have good processes and some do not. And so the time that you may have in your head that you want to get this technology out is very dependent on the organization and how they pursue sooner than later. On the other side of that, there's discussion of having a champion, which is so important because the story that you're telling about this technology and why it needs to be commercialized is critical for two reasons. It creates that commercial opportunity, and a lot of these agencies have small business and local economic impact statements and missions, but also with that, there is the detail behind specifically what you are trying to take out. It's very easy in the conversation for the discussion to be kind of overblown, and it incorporates so many things that are not part of what you're delivering. So refining that story, working with your champions, if they're the lead engineer or if they're even a potential customer, is really helpful in bringing that through those organizations. So I'm going to stop there and ask if you need any clarification on that, though.
I mean, I think that makes sense. So, it sounds very similar to, what any startup company, even if you're not, transitioning necessarily out of a lab space, let's say, or a university research department, it's you got to understand where your market fit is, who your buyers are, what your go-to-market strategy is, what's your appropriate pitch, and how are you going to market this thing, right? To
Sure.
fill that need. That's
Right.
ultimately it. But you get most of these researchers, right, that we all know that are not business people, right? And so they don't have that mindset. And perhaps, early on, they should start to think about, what I consider in the traditional acquisition world with the government, at least, the three critical elements I always tell people, right? You got to figure out where the money's going to come from, got to figure out how you're going to get the thing on contract, which is a purchase. And then you got to figure out also who your champion is going to be. And we already talked about that a little bit, right? In terms of, somebody to say, yeah, this is critical, this is needed for a particular mission set or something. But you got to figure out those things early on. You got to figure out how you're going to plan for each of those and then execute, against those plans. So it sounds very similar again to sort of the later acquisition processes, but then also in the startup, commercial sector. And I guess, you get each of you with businesses, active right now and in the past have experienced that. So again, like let's say you had to pick three, two or three points, critical points to absolutely tell a researcher working in the lab with something, and maybe they have a champion already. Now, how do they make it happen? What are the two or three most critical things to each of you? And Andrew, we can start with you on that.
Sure. Start early and build your team. Remember, you don't have to do this alone. So whether you're building that team with other people who may follow you in this journey or finding external people, the sooner you're starting that conversation outside of your traditional work environment, if you use the lab or AFRL, the better, because you really need that community support. And there's a lot of resources out there.
What about you? Thoughts on that?
For-
Any point, if you had to pick two or three, critical pointers or tips for any of these researchers, absolutely do this. This is critical early on to start, an eventual transfer process or, launching a business. What would it be?
Happy to jump in real quick, Doug. Yeah, wasn't sure, we weren't sure which who you were pointing to. I like the team side, and I'll also point towards who needs to be on that team. I wish I had a lawyer who understood both data rights within the government better, also funding strategies, because the first time you do tech transfer, you're going to need a lot of help. To the point Doug was, I want to double down on the point Doug made earlier around what's your funding strategy going to be? Because the tech transfer office will likely have not done fundraising before. They will kind of understand what an SVC is, but how you're going to do fundraising will shape how those investors look at your business for there on out. And if you take on terms, whether it's you don't have access to the IP in perpetuity, or you give up too much ownership in the company, and yeah, sometimes academic or sometimes academic tech transfer offices will say, oh, we'd like a little bit of equity in the company. And you don't need to give that up, but you need a lawyer who can review that contract because you just don't know your first time. So there's who are the researchers, who are the strategists you need in the team. There's also just like, who are the kind of the more the fractional folks you really need that can help keep you safe, because there are some irreversible decisions you can make, and they will hurt if you make them. So that's a big one. The other point is to know a patent is not a product. That would be the other thing I would say. You have a patent or a piece of trade secret that comes out of a lab. I'm sure it's valuable. I'm sure it's very far from being a product, and that's not a problem. It's only a problem if you decide that that's not true. So there's going to be a lot of development, whether it's TRL 3 or 6. There's still a lot of development to get it to TRL 9 and then get it mature in terms of manufacturing, unless you're doing software. And then it's still some manufacturing in quotes, but still you have a big gap to get over, and that's again why you're going to need a team, because it's going to take some time, and all that will be contingent on kind of how you think of funding it, what scale you're trying to go after. So I think those are the areas I would focus on. Yeah.
So, you talk about TRL levels and, scaling and the role of funding and all of that. I'm curious what each of you thinks of, the government funding vehicles that are out there to help with that. Everything from, BAAs that are issued to the SBIR, STTR, SIBR program, to the growing role, I would say, with OTAs and, the growing amount of consortia that are out there for those as well. So any thoughts on that, John? I know you played in that space a lot. So
yeah, we've done about 5 million to date, and we'll continue to do. That was all mostly SIBRs and a little bit of other collaboration opportunities through NASA. I did a lot in my prior businesses. We believe strongly in them, and we're a very CapEx heavy business, so we're always looking for ways to make our cost of capital lower. And for us, we can work with the government, develop IP. SIBRs are often, I'm going to mess this up probably, according to some agency, it's often 5 years of SIBR data rights, up to 20, depending on the agency and the specific contract. But you get really good protection. They help you pay to develop that IP. You get free access. You get protected access to it. They can help you develop capabilities. So we leverage it a lot. Where I think there can be some confusion is it's non-dilutive, but it's not free. You really pay to play. If you have a good capture person, you have a network of relationships, and that applies to OTAs too. If you're in the room and you're not sure who's the relevant competitors are for an OTA, it's probably not you. You're right. It's kind of where I found, and we've followed that advice ourselves often, where we just don't go after a BAA or an RFP because we don't really have the network to really back channel and understand kind of what they're really looking for, what might not be what's in between the lines of the RFP, and we don't want to spend 40 hours over a couple of weeks or 40 hours per week to develop a really extensive proposal, only to fail and then be 40, 80 hours behind on product development. So if you're going to go after it, you have to go after it intentionally, and you need to add those types of team roles to your team. So like we worked with fractional folks early on capture. It would help us win proposals, and now we're building out that part of the business more extensively in-house. But there's certainly a decent number of payroll goes to folks on that, just to keep that rolling. It's an entire separate part of our business, and we treat it as such, and it's a big investment. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want to go back to relationships, and I think both from the agency side, but also the commercial side. So what we found helpful is working and partnering with commercial entities, so defense contractors, aerospace companies, in jointly pursuing different types of BAAs or SIBRs, STTRs, et cetera. They often have relationships within those agencies, insight into the technology or the use that can sometimes be lost in translation. So if you can partner and there's an opportunity to do so, that's very enabling for a company that's just getting started. But on the agency side, right, understanding who the contracting officers are, who the technical officers are, being able to reach out and connect for clarification, building relationships, as you write your proposal, how do you tailor that to really be very specific to their needs? A lot of times some technology requests are very general, And so getting insight into those is important. And I think that goes a long way. And again, back to the New Mexico economy, we have a lot of individuals who are representative of those agencies today and can help either make those connections or be resources for helping you pursue that. Again, through Hyperspace Challenge, through Q Station, through any of the other accelerators that AFRL is affiliated with, Catalyst Campus, and so on. Great resources. And I'll say they also have access to outside resources to assist with that. So again, build your team, find the resources. There's a lot locally that's available to help you be successful.
No, I agree with all of that. And I think, well, two things real quick. So John, I just wanted to point out before I forget, it is 20 years of data rights, and that is law. So anybody that tells you 5 years, that's definitely room to push back on that.
AFWorks sitters haven't changed their contracts. I learned from my lawyer about 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Well, the lawyers should push back, and they should change the contracts. It's in the policy directive. It has been, and that is directly tied back to the change in law. So
yeah, it's all going that way for sure. Yeah.
It's certainly 20 years. Yeah. So Doug, did you have any role with the SIBR programs or other government programs early on, and how much did they influence your success in your businesses?
Yeah, so I have very strong opinions on SBIRs. In fact, I wrote a piece in Venture Beat about the trials and tribulations, shall we say, in SBIR. I think that piece is maybe 4 or 5 years old, but it's still relevant today. And so what I mean by that is SBIR program is a phenomenal program. I love how it calls itself America's Seed Fund. The problem with SBIR is the barrier to entry is not very high. It's actually not, it's pretty easy to get SBIRs. And I've seen many companies I call it get drunk on SBIRs. And that's ultimately all they end up doing. And it ultimately, can be abusive to the company. So I always strongly caution folks when they look at SBIRs, use them wisely, only use them as much as you need them. Do not fall into the trap of becoming an SBIR mill company. I don't want to see that. And so, I'll use a couple of examples. Both of my companies got off the ground due to federal government funded R&D. In the case of Solid Power, it was a large grant from ARPA-E. In the case of Rocore, it was a series of SBIRs. However, at Rocore, we quickly graduated from SBIRs, I would say over a period of about 5 to 6 years, and then eventually transitioned into programs of record, and that was by design. So we used the SBIR program for what it was meant to do, and we didn't have to raise any money. At no point, when we sold to Redwire, we were still a wholly owned company. We had no investors on the board. You can't really do that with a battery company. So that's why Solid Power eventually had to raise a lot of money from venture capital and then a lot of money from Wall Street. So yeah, I have very strong opinions on SBIR. I'll just leave it at that.
I think we all do, to be fair.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, with all of you talking a little bit about the cyberspace and how you played in it, did it stop at the 1 and 2 level, or did you guys see much activity in 3?
Phases.
Yeah.
I can take that. I mean, at Rocore, yeah, we did. We got into phase 3 because that's kind of how the program's intended to work. It doesn't always work that way. But the beauty of an SBIR contract is it's a competed contract. So if you can find a program of record out there, they can plunk down money onto that as a contract vehicle. And that's exactly what we did.
We are still working. We're 2.5 years old. I didn't share that yet, but we have a number of phase 2s and are now working on our phase 3 transition plans and have some good encouraging verbal results on that, but nothing to share yet. But yeah, intend to do that. And our whole focus with SBIR, to Doug's point, is to look at our overall product roadmap and find ways to use non-dilutive money to move that product roadmap forward, but not spread out endlessly into a million categories that are kind of not strategically focused. Yeah, he makes a great point. Yeah.
That's pretty good that you guys have a couple 2s with only 3 years in business. Pretty good.
Yeah, I wanted to latch onto what John just said. for Hunify, focus became ultimately the area where we went back away from government funding like SBIR. So ultimately, we were finding ourselves trying to adapt some of our product and technologies into areas that were valuable, but weren't necessarily true to what we were trying to accomplish. And we were getting a lot of feedback that primarily government funding is not attractive to investors, venture capital, and a good foundation. We're very comfortable working in that space, having all of us come out of national security space, but we gave that as an opportunity to go shift back toward the commercial side and maybe come back around as our technology continues to mature, because we focus on bringing this compute to the edge, and that's super important in a lot of SBIR and government spaces, right? How can you get more computation and analytics out in the field in real time? So hope to be back there, but it's a great avenue to pursue. And I think we heard some good success stories on how to help people get funding and start building momentum with their company.
So that's sort of the federal side of it. And what about on the private side? You know, what's your guys' experience there, and what advice do you have to give to folks that will eventually have to go out and try to raise capital, you know, not from the federal government? I mean, it's a totally different process, if there even is a process, depending on who you're pitching, right? So, you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we've seen most success in really defining the market you're pursuing, right? And the problem that you're solving and why you have a particular advantage in that space, right? So traditional product market fit, what is the vision of the company? How are you solving that today? And why are you the right team? I continue to emphasize this. I know there's a lot of people that come out of entrepreneurial separation at Sandia or other agencies, and they kind of go out on their own trying to do it all. It's really important to have a good team of people around you and know that, you know, they're bringing their best and all of their insight and information in. And what I have experienced personally through this company is that an investor invests in the team first and the technology second. And so, you know, that has been an interesting part of our journey. We always felt, no, the technology is going to solve this. This is awesome whiz bang capability. We see a lot more interest in the team and in the vision of the product, and, you know, past experience with the ability to execute that. So we're still growing in that space as well. So our journey will certainly change and become more rich, but that's where we are today.
What about you? Doing the rounds on VCs, PEs, hitting up some family offices for money? What's your path look like, and any tips or tricks to pass out?
Who's that for?
That's for you, Doug. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I didn't hear my name. Well, I have a lot of experience in raising venture capital. So if I'm sitting down with a budding entrepreneur who's asking me about venture capital, my first question is, are you sure? Are you sure you need to do it? Because once you do it, there's no going back. So, you know, they come onto your cap table. Oftentimes they join your board. To me, good reasons for raising capital, venture capital, are move quicker. I mean, that's the downside of government funding and SBIRs, is it moves very, very slow, and there's not a whole lot you can do to scooch it along, shall we say. Venture can move very, very quickly. And so, you know, good uses of venture money are, there's a window of opportunity, and you just can't get there fast enough with non-dilutive funding. And with venture money, you can move very, very quickly. The second thing to remember with venture capital is nobody really cares about your idea. Okay, don't be a hammer looking for a nail. You need to start with the market pain first. What market pain are you solving? I don't give a crap about your widget until you get me excited about the market pain that your widget might be solving. Once you get me excited about your market pain, okay, let's hear about your widget. And then I'll echo Andrew. It is a rare person who can, you know, be both a technologist and a leader of a company through multiple stages of growth. So my advice is, you got to take a hard look in the mirror and make a list of the things you're good at and a list of the things you're not good at. And if the list of the things that you're good at is longer than the things that you're not good at, you're lying to yourself. There should just be a small handful of things that you personally are particularly good at. And then you got to go out and recruit co-founders and other team members that complement you. They don't replicate you, they complement you, meaning they do the things that you're not good at. Are you a good pitch man? Yes or woman, pitch person? Yes or no? The answer is no. Well, you darn well better go find somebody.
John, how about you? Any
Yeah, I'm less
advice?
involved. I was very involved in our pre-seed and somewhat in our seed, and now we're doing a Series A, and I get pulled in for the technical talks, so I'm not as involved in the fundraising as the one CTO on the call here. I will talk about the hammer searching for a nail problem. I think that is particularly in other entrepreneurs I've mentored. That's particularly expressed problem with engineers, where they fall in love with a piece of tech, which there's nothing wrong with doing that. But Doug is very right that VCs truly don't care. And you really have to ask whether or not the piece of tech is revolutionary, whether or not it actually will scale, all those things. And that's venture capital really is for businesses that will scale exponentially, and whether or not the thing you're trying to build, whether or not you even want that. I really like how Doug put it. Yeah, like, do you want to do that? Is that what this is well suited for? In our case, the reason I joined up with my co-founder, I was actually mentoring his team. His team dropped out, and they had this great IP portfolio from NASA, but I didn't join for that reason. It was good IP. It flew on. This is tech that flew on the shuttle, but he had done about 3 to 5x more customer discovery interviews than any of the other teams I was mentoring at the time. And I said, well, he's actually going to learn the market pain points. And we went on to do like 300 in the first year, maybe less than the year. So we just did an incredible amount of networking, and it can look like it's less activity, but we talked to integrators on vehicles, subject matter experts like federal labs, primes. We talked to everybody within the ecosystem and really learned the problem. And we were able to put together a really compelling pitch because we built the market from the bottom up and had very proprietary market analysis and could say, hey, this is where this is going within the new space economy. And we can fill that need. And it was 100% what Doug said around just identify the market, identify the scale it's going to take on, and go from there. The tech came later, and now we're building all that out, build a great team, and filing lots of patents. But it was much more around the market at first. Yeah.
So it sounds like all of you are agreeing that, contrary to TikTok, build it and they will come does not really occur to be successful, right? So what we're really talking about here is commercialization that the government overuses, considerably. And I wanted to touch on that term real quick for a second and get your guys' thoughts here. So when I was back at GSA in their innovation division, we had this, we worked with everybody across government. And within the DoD, all of us got together and we tried to come up with a common definition of what is commercialization. And what we essentially ended up doing was just agreeing with the Navy's version, which is, as long as you have a product or service, essentially a solution of any kind, and somebody somewhere is buying it, that's commercialization, right? I mean, the ultimate catch-all, for everything. So my question to you guys is, what does commercialization mean to you? Particularly when playing in the government space, and is it more important to think about building your product, because paired with that term often is dual use. Paired with that or against commercialization, is it better to focus your efforts on the private sector, do you think? Or is it on the government sector? And Doug, I'm thinking about your point of getting stuck in that 1-2 SIBR mill phase. If you're 100% focused on the government, sometimes that's what happens because you're not focused on the private side. And then venture capitalists, they forget it too. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that matter. And Andrew, why don't we start with you? We haven't heard from you in a little bit.
That's a big question. For us, commercialization really focused on taking, understanding the mission, helping ensure the technologies that we are developing are, and our background is very dual use. So coming out of the national labs, you see a lot of government need and you see an awful lot of commercial need. And there's often a really strong nexus between those two. And a lot of it has to do with advancing technologies, simplifying technologies, and more effectiveness. So for us, commercialization was ultimately, evolving the tech for both areas, because the government needs to operate a lot of times this technology out in the field, forward operating bases in theater. And they're working very closely with lots of companies to help build, manage, support, deploy, et cetera, and continue to mature that. So we look at it very broadly. We're trying to bring this to the broader area. We try not to hyper specialize that for one particular use case, because we're an enabling technology. So we really deliver something that can deliver lots of capabilities, but there's often very, very finite needs. So without rambling, we look at it very broadly. We see a lot of partnership between the commercial and the government coming out of that space. We're very comfortable working on that and understand the mission speed of the government versus the commercial and cost recovery capitalist side of the private businesses, and try to make a marriage there that is creating an opportunity and a capability that really benefits everybody. We deeply believe in national security. I think everybody on this call does. And so that's, what's our purpose? That's a big part of what drives us to make sure that we're achieving that effectively.
Great points. Doug, you have anything to add to that?
And this is related to the challenges of bridging SBIR funding to true commercialization.
Yep.
I think it just depends on your end market. If your end market is defense related, commercialization in that arena is the exact same in the private arena. You've got to identify, whatever market pain you're addressing, and then obviously the acquisition process is different. So you've got to sort of learn the game, but it's good old fashioned sales 101. You got to get in front of people. You've got to identify customers. You've got to pursue them. You've got to, again, not sell your tech, solve their problem. It's really no different, private or public.
And Doug, real quick there before we move on to John, what do you think about the role of larger businesses, so medium and large companies, and teaming with these startups that are coming out of labs early on as a way to ease into the government?
I mean, it's in the defense arena, it's huge, right? Because oftentimes your widget might be way up the supply chain, and your widget has to get plugged into some other system that's being built by Lockheed Martin. So oftentimes your sales process starts there with the prime contractor, and then eventually you get to the government because they're the ones writing the check. But I would call that a strategic partner. I love strategic partners. Now you got to be careful when you're looking at strategic partners in the venture side of things. There's such a thing as being too strategic, because oftentimes strategic partners, if they're going to invest in you, they usually want something for their money. It's not just equity. They want something, exclusivity to da 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 da. Man, you got to be careful with that, because you start running out of things to give, and that's your seed corn, honestly. So I love strategics, just got to be careful.
And I can piggyback on that and say there is a ton of truth in that. I personally even consult for a lot of medium and large size firms that are very interested in startup companies and their technology to plug into larger solutions. And yes, sometimes they will offer freebies up front. But in the end,
there's no free lunch.
They don't just want to see the growth of the small business for, their own sake. Yeah, there's something else at play there for sure. John, what about you? Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, Doug's taken a lot of what I had. They're great points there. So we're deep in the supply chain, right? We make components. So that means by definition, the government is never going to buy. For us specifically, this can vary, but generally speaking, the government does not buy components. DLA will say otherwise. It's not trivial. It's really hard to sell a component. It's not a good go-to-market strategy. So we knew that up front. So we work with the government on the R&D side. We found good champions, and then we go to the primes and we help them. We work between those two parties to develop, to understand requirements, ideally long-term help set requirements, because we can use this tech to innovate on performance and add performance. And okay, the prime wants that, the government wants that. That said, that's a long acquisition cycle. We're certainly dual use. Our entire go-to-market initially is private sector. So new space is all about how fast can you develop hardware and get it flown. And so one of our key product lines is thermal protection systems, the materials that protect vehicles on reentry. And so we licensed tech for NASA. We stood up as fast as possible and, lined up our testing, our testing dates, and to try to demonstrate speed, because that's kind of investors will see you have a good market, you've identified a market, and they're going to see you have a good team, and now they want to see the team doing something. And so we've done the first two, and now we're demonstrating the last third. And so I think it gets back to a point Doug was talking about earlier, like what's your go-to-market, what speed do you want to have, and is the opportunity one that requires speed? We definitely focus on making sure we went private first, because new space just moves much faster than the DoD. The DoD is kind of on like a simmer, right? We know we'll get there eventually, but there is no hypersonic program of record yet. So we don't know how our tech, right? So I can't go to a hypersonic program record and say, oh, okay, you need this for your program. They're going to say there's no requirement. And so our case is a little unique in that way, but yeah, that's kind of how we think about it. We're definitely dual use, but have broadened out to make sure we have a pretty broad commercial application, so we can don't have that concentrated risk that sometimes investors cited in our earlier fundraising rounds.
And that's an excellent point you make about, not having a program of record in place for around a certain technology or, focus area. If there's no appropriation flowing there, you're really stuck outside of the mandated SIBR, funding set aside for 1s and 2s, right? So there's no, because now you have to do the BD work to go out and find money for phase 3, right, outside of that mandated set aside. And if there's no program of record, if there's no appropriation line for that, I mean, there's or budget line, then it just doesn't exist, right? You have to get really creative, and that's very, very difficult to do, and that takes years.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
things like DPA they're trying to figure that out, right? The government knows there are gaps. They want a hypersonic program record eventually. They know if they don't kind of help the industrial base now, there won't be one when they actually do need it for the program of record. But those aren't trivial to navigate either. So yeah, we get pretty creative, but also again we focus on the private side a lot initially, just to avoid these challenges, let them work themselves out over time.
Well, we've got about a little over 10 minutes left, I think, and we've got some questions in the Q&A. So I thought, unless you guys have any final words, based on our discussion, we could hop right into those. And the way I'll do it, I'll just how about I read a question, and then if you just want to pop your hand up and take an answer, let's do it that way. All right. So the first one is from Caitlin Duffy. And her question is, how heavily does having a go-to-market messaging and/or marketing strategy in place affect the likelihood of consideration for acquisitions and agreements? And I think we talked about this a little bit, but if any of you want to field that.
I think when you get to a point of investment, the go-to-market strategy and your messaging is super important, especially if you're proposing a path that most people don't have direct experience with, right? How many of you have used a supercomputer? You just don't know it, right? So telling that story is sometimes very difficult for people who are not used to that area of technical domains. But maybe the question is more geared toward SIBR, STTR. I still think it's the story that you're telling about what is your market, what problem are you solving, and why are you the right team to do that? I think that's really important, and it is very difficult to hit one storyline that resonates with everybody. So you find yourself, to some extent, rewriting that narrative a bit depending on the type of audience that you're presenting to.
Okay, let's see our next question here. Carol Zanmiller, we already answered it a bit, so I'm just going to give a shout out because I know Carol. Hi, Carol. And we're going to move on to JR. So Jay's asking a question about TRL level, and essentially it sounds like he's saying, or he's asking, if you're not even at level 4 or 5 yet, is it worth playing in the space? Is there room to engage with? He's specifically talking AFRL, but I think we could apply this across, all of the labs and the federal opportunities that are out there for support and funding. And before you guys jump in, I'll just say my opinion real quick is yes, there absolutely is space to play if you're not at TRL 4 or 5 yet. I've seen it happen, certainly. Now, like within the SIBR program specifically, as one of many, many options to engage, it depends, obviously, what level we're at here, right? Even with BAAs, it depends what level you're at, but BAs typically, you're below or you're at a certain TRL level and above, 5, 6 and above. So yeah, I mean, it all depends on the vehicle. It all depends on, the program and where you're at in that particular program. But there is certainly room to play at the, basic research and early applied research stages.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I mean, how do we get new tech? Every new tech starts at a TRL 1.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that is one of the strengths of SBIRs. Obviously it varies from different agency, but certain agencies are very receptive to early TRL stuff.
I'll add at a meta level, like theoretically, this is not the right audience to answer that question, because you have to have a piece of tech, a specific instantiation of tech, and then go have someone you want to work with and talk to them about it to see if they want to work with low TRL tech. Because even in SIBRs, they'll have like this topic wants TRL 6 and this topic wants TRL 4. You'll see variation, and it's really more about being up front. And like some folks at NASA want to work on TRL 1, 2, some want to work on TRL 9. And you just need to know that you're working with the right person. And so it's not really a question that can be answered in kind of like the theoretical. It's a very applied question, actually, in my opinion. You actually have to like build a relationship, have the conversation with them to say, hey, this is TRL 3. Are you gonna be okay with that? So.
Here's a good one. I think this will lead to a good little conversation here. Have you guys considered licensing from a SIBR mill? And this is Sarah. I hope I pronounced this right. Mitran, who's asking this. And I will add another question to that. Have you considered purchasing a SIBR award from another company? Not just licensing.
How do you do that? How do you purchase a SIBR award?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's becoming more and more common. You can go and you can purchase a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And now you have the data rights. You own it completely. So if you're a company and you don't have any SIBR awards, you can go buy your way into a phase 3 sole source.
This is after execution or before execution?
I'm still confused.
After execution of so a company has performed a 1, 2, they've completed a contract, and now you can purchase it from them. You essentially you're purchasing the data rights is what you're doing. Yeah.
If it makes business sense, go for it.
I actually have heard of private equity, right? So SIBRs are often not counted as real revenue, and they shouldn't be because it's really spotty unless you're a SIBR mill, and then you got to say you're a SIBR mill. And sure, it's revenue, but you're not doing anything too strategic yet. However, I have talked to some private equity folks who are willing to engage once there are real phase 3s on the table, because those, especially if they're for actual, not S&T type phase 3s, but like actual acquisition, folks are willing to invest, are much more willing to invest at that stage. And I think it makes a lot of sense from the investor perspective. And if it's private equity, there could be some change of ownership. So that feels like it kind of fits in that bucket. We haven't looked at that too extensively. We're just too early. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. It makes business sense.
I agree with that. In fact, that I've seen it both when I was in the government, where people would do that, and then I'm seeing it now, outside the government, even where a lot of the large primes within the federal government space are looking to purchase up previous phase contracts so that they can get access to a phase 3, because obviously there's no size standards at that point, and so it gives them an ability to capture that IP and integrate it in. So it's a unique relatively new look at it. And I keep telling somebody's just got to come up with the ability to create a brokerage platform for all of the previous 1s, 2s, and 3s that aren't used anymore, and figure out a way to integrate those in, and that could be fairly lucrative. So business model for someone out there. All right, let's jump to our last question to close it out. Can the panel speak to experiences with partnership intermediaries? So for example, if you're not, and maybe you're not familiar with the term or not, I'm not sure, but that is a contracting process that the government can partake in with nonprofit entities within a state. Typically, there has to be some affiliation with the university as well. And that those companies help with the tech transition process of the small businesses that they engage with. So examples would be like, well, hyperspace is one, and then you have like New Space Nexus in New Mexico, you have Catalyst Accelerator in Colorado, those types of entities.
Other than being on this panel, I have no experience with those.
We recently joined New Space. We really like the idea that we don't have to go establish credos with all these different federal lab bases, that we can like leverage those. We're like, we got to New Mexico pretty often, but we won't have an office out there for a while. But it's like establishing a credo can take 6 months to a year. So right, like not having to deal with that process helps me go faster. And we were pretty invested in building relationships at Kirtland, so it's been super helpful. I don't know if that was the exact question. I had to understand what was being asked first.
Yeah, Gary, in theory, right? In principle, absolutely, right? These are great teams to help enable and bring technology in and help, expedite relationships in the process. So yes, but to touch on something Doug said earlier, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Along that line, there's always a transaction. And so that's okay. That's business, right? And that's normal. That's how things get done. But you have to understand the terms and conditions of that and be willing to make concessions in some areas, whether that's bringing on an advisor to your company or hiring a co-founder or bringing on an investor, right? The same thing. Partnerships need a way to succeed. Maybe that's through bonus points that these agencies get, and sometimes that's through additional revenue through partnership, IP, and so on. And so, what's their intent? What are they asking? And does it make business sense? So.
Well, those are all of our questions that we have in the Q&A, and I've enjoyed our discussion. Next time we should do a happy hour version. Everybody just drinks while they talk and really loosen up. Really let out how we really feel, Anyway, nice chatting with you guys. Kelly, I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the conversation here, and I will turn it over to you for any closing remarks.
Okay, awesome. You guys, that's so amazing. I feel like you guys gave them so many nuggets. I got to go back and rewatch and dissect it. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for everything. Thanks to our audience. And I love that you guys have been active in the chat and kind of connecting there too. So we always love that. That's kind of what this is about. We're trying to build those partnerships, relationships, answer questions, and you guys are living it in real life. So that's great. If you liked this video, if you liked this program, we have more of them on our YouTube channel. You guys should take a look at that. This one will be housed there as well. So come back, rewatch, watch it 5 times, whatever. We want you to watch it as many times as you need. We want views. So amp that up. We are also, gearing up for our next Hyperspace Challenge. We've got, some new developments, and we'll probably have some things that we can shout out here soon. So be on our mailing list, check that, open it up. When you see Hyperspace Challenge, open that email so that you make sure that you're getting them in the future as well. If you want to sponsor your own webinar, we have opportunities for that. If you have a product or something that you feel like our people would really need to know about, we have opportunities where you can put your logo on our emails that go out to everybody for these webinars. So please reach out to me if you need that. We have a survey when we close out. You guys are going to get the survey pop up in front of you on the screen. Please answer those questions. It helps us make this better for you, and give us your ideas for future webinars. We want to know what questions, what pain points, things that you are needing to know. So, and I can help, I can go out. That's my specialty, going out and finding those people who can answer it. And also be aware, Albuquerque, New Mexico, you want to be here in June 6th in the afternoon. We are having what's called the Space Fiesta. It's a new first ever Space Fiesta. We're hoping to get everybody in the Albuquerque area that has to do with space involved. And we're also wanting everybody across the nation to come as well. So please come join us. We put that link in the chat. You can register, you can get a table. Small businesses can get a free table. And then Also, our next webinar, I'm sorry, I know I'm taking you guys over, but our next excuse me, our next webinar is going to be another installment of our Entrepreneur's Guide to Space Investing. And it's so popular that we want to bring it again quarterly. PJ Cook is going to be moderating. We'll have Nick Snode of Marlinspike and John Richmond of Lockheed Ventures. And we're also going to bring in John Lacoste of Space VC. And I'm hoping that we're going to take kind of a different look at it. So how they view government funding and where they find out, you know, all of the nitty gritty details about where they want to invest according to where government is spending their money, what their priorities are. So you'll want to take a look at that if you can. And we got that link in the chat as well. So with that, I'm going to let y'all go. I appreciate it. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much to our panel. You guys were awesome. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Well.